The music was blasting, the drinks were flowing, and the backyard was packed with raucous laughter as my brother's 30th birthday bash kicked into high gear. I was having a blast, mingling with the crowd and keeping an eye on the revelers to make sure things didn't get too out of hand. Just as I was refilling my cup, I noticed a harried-looking woman striding towards me, her face twisted in a scowl. "Excuse me," she yelled, her shrill voice cutting through the music. "I live next door, and this noise is completely unacceptable. I've already called the police." I blinked in surprise, taken aback by her aggressive tone. "But it's only 8 p.m., I stammered. "The party just started. We're keeping it within reasonable hours, I promise." The woman, who I now recognized as our neighbor Karen, sniffed disdainfully. "Reasonable hours? This is a residential area, not a nightclub. You're disturbing the entire neighborhood with your raucous behavior." Before I could respond, the unmistakable wail of sirens pierced the air. Karen shot me a triumphant smirk. "There they are. Now you'll see what happens when you disrupt the peace." My heart sank as I watched the police car pull up to the curb. I braced myself for a confrontation, mentally rehearsing how I would politely explain the situation to the officer. But when the door swung open and a familiar face emerged, I nearly dropped my drink in shock. "Danny," I blurted out, staring at my brother's best friend in disbelief. The officer paused, his brow furrowed, before a wide grin spread across his face. "Well, if it isn't the birthday boy's sister." He strode over, clasping my hand warmly. "I should have known this was your doing. Happy birthday to your brother, by the way." Karen's smug expression morphed into one of bewilderment as she watched our friendly exchange. "Wait, you know each other," she stammered. Danny turned to her, his smile fading. "Yes, ma'am, I do. This is my good friend's sister, and they're hosting a perfectly reasonable birthday celebration." His tone hardened. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't call the cops on them again." Karen's face flushed with embarrassment, and she opened and closed her mouth several times, unable to form a coherent response. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at her discomfort. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Danny continued, "I have a birthday party to attend." He winked at me, then strode past a dumbfounded Karen and back towards the house, the music and laughter swelling to greet him. As I watched him go, I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this night had in store. One thing was for sure. Karen had just made a very powerful enemy. As Danny made his way back to the party, I couldn't help but feel a surge of relief and gratitude. Karen, on the other hand, looked utterly mortified, her face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't realize," she stammered, her eyes darting between Danny and me. I couldn't resist the urge to rub it in a little. "Didn't realize what, Karen?" "That the police officer you called on us happens to be my brother's best friend." I shook my head in mock disappointment. Tesk. You really should do your homework before making such hasty decisions." Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. She stood there, looking like a deer caught in the headlights, as Danny rejoined the party and the music and laughter swelled once more. Sensing an opportunity, I decided to press my advantage. "You know, Karen, I have to say, I'm a little disappointed in you. I thought we were all trying to be good neighbors and get along. But calling the cops on a birthday celebration, that's a bit excessive, don't you think?" Karen's face twisted into a scowl. Excessive. That noise was completely out of control. I have a right to peace and quiet in my own home, you know. I raised an eyebrow. "And we have a right to celebrate a special occasion with our friends and family. As long as we're keeping it within reasonable hours, I don't see the problem." "But," Karen began, her voice rising in pitch. I held up a hand to cut her off. "Look, Karen, I get that you're upset, but taking it out on us isn't going to solve anything. Why don't you come join the party? Get to know us a little better. I'm sure we could find a way to compromise and keep everyone happy." Karen's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Compromised? With you people. I sighed, realizing that reasoning with her was going to be an uphill battle. Suit yourself, Karen. But just remember, you made an enemy of a very influential person today. I gestured towards Danny, who was currently laughing and chatting with a group of our friends. And trust me, you don't want to mess with him. With that, I turned and headed back towards the party, leaving a flustered and fuming Karen in my wake. As I rejoined the festivities, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was just the beginning, and I had a feeling that Karen's troubles were far from over. As the night wore on, the party only seemed to grow louder and more lively. Danny had rejoined the festivities, and his presence brought an air of camaraderie and good cheer that was infectious. The guests were mingling, laughing, and dancing, seemingly unaware of the simmering tension with our neighbor. But Karen, it seemed, was not so easily deterred. I spotted her pacing back and forth on her front porch, her face a mask of barely concealed fury. Every time the music swelled or a burst of laughter echoed across the yards, her expression would darken. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she marched back over to our side of the fence, her eyes blazing. "All right, that's it," she shouted, her voice shrill and grating. "I've had enough of this nonsense. I'm calling the police again." I groaned inwardly, bracing myself for another confrontation. But before I could even respond, Danny stepped forward, his expression stern. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down and return to your own property," he said, his voice low and authoritative. Karen blinked, momentarily taken aback by his sudden appearance. But they're disturbing the peace," she sputtered. "It's my right to call the police if I'm being subjected to this kind of nuisance." Danny shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't allow you to do that. This is a perfectly lawful and reasonable celebration, and I won't have you harassing my friends and their family." Karen's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Danny cut her off. "Now, I'm going to give you one last warning. If you continue to interfere with this party, I'll have no choice but to issue you a citation for disturbing the peace. Do I make myself clear?" For a moment, Karen looked utterly dumbfounded, her mouth working soundlessly. Then, with a huff of indignation, she spun on her heel and stalked back towards her house, muttering under her breath. I couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief, my admiration for Danny growing by the minute. "Wow, you really put her in her place," I murmured, giving him a grateful smile. Danny shrugged, a wry grin spreading across his face. "Hey, I'm a cop first and a friend second. I've got to protect the peace, even if it means standing up to a nosy neighbor." As the party resumed around us, I couldn't help but wonder what other tricks Karen might have up her sleeve. One thing was certain. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. The rest of the night passed without any further confrontations with Karen, much to my relief. Danny's stern mourning seemed to have done the trick, and she remained conspicuously absent from the festivities. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of her stewing in her own frustration, powerless to interfere with our celebration. As the party began to wind down, and the guests started to trickle out, I found myself alone with Danny, helping him tidy up the backyard. "Thanks again for stepping in back there," I said, flashing him a grateful smile. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't shown up." Danny chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, it's no problem. I'm just glad I could help. That Karen woman seems like a real piece of work, though. What's her deal, anyway?" I sighed, leaning against the fence. "Honestly, I'm not sure. She's always been kind of a grump, but this is the first time she's gone as far as calling the cops on us. I guess she just doesn't like the idea of anyone having fun in her neck of the woods." "Well, she picked the wrong party to crash," Danny said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Not when she's up against the birthday boy's best friend on the force." I couldn't help but laugh. No kidding. I have a feeling she's about to learn that the hard way. We lapsed into a comfortable silence for a moment, the sound of the remaining guests chatting and cleaning up filling the air. Then, Danny turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. "Listen, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. Something that's been on my mind for a while now." I felt a flutter of anticipation in my chest, my heart rate quickening. "What is it?" Danny took a deep breath, his gaze locking with mine. "Well, the thing is, I've been thinking about asking your brother if I can take you out on a date." I blinked, my mind racing as I processed his words. "A date? With me?" I stammered, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. Danny nodded, a sheepish smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, I really like you, and I've been wanting to make a move for a while now. But I wanted to make sure it was okay with your brother first. I know how protective he can be." I couldn't help but laugh, the tension in the air dissipating. "Oh, trust me, he's going to be thrilled. He's been trying to set us up for years." Danny's eyes widened in surprise, and then a brilliant smile spread across his face. "Really? Well, in that case." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to gently caress my cheek. "Would you do me the honor of going out to dinner with me?" I leaned into his touch, my heart racing. "I'd love to," I murmured, my eyes shining with happiness. As we stood there, lost in each other's embrace, a part of me couldn't help but wonder what Karen's reaction would be when she found out about this new development. But in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. All that mattered was the man in front of me, and the promise of a future filled with joy and adventure. The next few days passed in a blur of excitement and anticipation. Danny and I had our first official date, and it was everything I could have hoped for and more. We laughed, we talked, and we discovered that our connection ran deeper than either of us had ever imagined. As for Karen, she seemed to have retreated to her own little world, keeping a low profile in the aftermath of her failed attempts to disrupt the party. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of her stewing in her own frustration, powerless to interfere with my newfound happiness. But that satisfaction was short-lived, as I soon learned that Karen was not one to be easily deterred. It all started when I noticed a flyer taped to the community bulletin board, advertising a neighborhood watch meeting. Curious, I decided to attend, hoping to gain some insight into the group's activities and their relationship with Karen. As I walked into the small community center, I was immediately met with a barrage of suspicious glares and hushed whispers. It was clear that I was not exactly a welcome addition to the group. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I spotted Karen sitting at the front of the room, a smug expression on her face. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I felt my hackles rise, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Karen," I acknowledged, inclining my head slightly. "I must say, I'm surprised to see you here," Karen continued, her eyes narrowing. "Considering the disturbances you and your family have been causing in our peaceful neighborhood." I felt my jaw tighten, but I refused to rise to the bait. "I'm simply here to learn more about the neighborhood watch and how I can be a good neighbor," I said evenly. Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, I think you already know how to be a good neighbor," she spat. "Throwing loud parties, disturbing the peace, and calling the police on your own kind. Hardly the behavior of a model citizen, if you ask me." I could feel the tension in the room thickening, and I knew I had to tread carefully. "Look, Karen, I'm not here to argue. I just want to understand how I can be a better part of this community." "That's rich, coming from you," Karen scoffed. "As far as I'm concerned, you and your family are nothing but a nuisance. And I, for one, am going to make sure that the rest of the neighborhood knows it." With that, she turned and addressed the group, her voice rising in a dramatic flourish. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you're all aware of the ongoing disturbances in our quiet little neighborhood. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's time to take a stand. I felt my heart sink as I watched the faces of the other residents light up with a mix of outrage and determination. This was not going to end well. As Karen continued to rally the neighborhood watch group against me and my family, I felt a growing sense of dread. This was not the first time I had dealt with a difficult neighbor, but there was something about Karen's unwavering determination that set my nerves on edge. I tried to interject, to reason with the group, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. Karen had clearly poisoned the well, painting us as the black sheep of the community, and the others were all too eager to buy into her narrative. It's time we put an end to the constant disruptions and chaos these people have brought to our peaceful neighborhood, Karen declared, her voice rising with each word. They have no respect for the rules, no regard for their neighbors, and it's high time we take action. The crowd erupted in a chorus of agreement, and I felt my stomach churn. I had to do something, but what? Confronting Karen directly would only make the situation worse, and trying to reason with the group seemed futile. That's when a familiar face emerged from the crowd, cutting through the din. "Hold on a minute, everyone," Danny said, his voice firm and commanding. "Let's not get carried away here." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Karen's expression shifted from one of triumph to one of barely concealed panic. "Officer," she stammered, "what are you doing here?" Danny fixed her with a stern gaze. "I'm here to make sure this meeting doesn't turn into a witch hunt. These are my friends and neighbors you're talking about, and I won't stand for any harassment or intimidation." Karen's face flushed with anger, but before she could retort, Danny continued. "Now, I understand there have been some issues in the past, but let's not forget that we're all part of the same community. We should be working together to find solutions, not turning against each other." The crowd murmured in a mix of agreement and dissent, and I felt a surge of gratitude towards Danny. He was standing up for us, using his position of authority to defuse the situation. Karen, however, was not about to back down. "Solutions?" she scoffed. "The only solution is to get these troublemakers out of our neighborhood. They're disrupting our way of life, and it's high time someone put a stop to it." Danny's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't allow that. These are my friends, and I'm not going to let you bully them out of their own homes. If you have any legitimate concerns, I'm happy to discuss them with you. But I won't stand for any harassment or intimidation." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the rest of the group seemed to have lost their enthusiasm for her crusade. The tension in the room slowly dissipated, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. As the meeting came to a close, Karen shot me a venomous glare, her eyes blazing with fury. I knew that this was far from over, but for now, I was just grateful to have Danny in my corner. In the days following the neighborhood watch meeting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Karen had been uncharacteristically quiet, and I knew that it was only the calm before the storm. Sure enough, my suspicions were confirmed when I received a knock on the door one afternoon. Cautiously, I opened it to find a uniformed officer standing on my doorstep. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I have some bad news," the officer said, his expression grave. "There's been a complaint filed against you and your family regarding noise violations and disturbances in the neighborhood." My heart sank as I realized that this was Karen's next move in her ongoing crusade against us. "But we've been keeping the noise to a minimum and following all the local ordinances," I protested, my mind racing. The officer nodded sympathetically. "I understand, ma'am, but the complaint was filed by one of your neighbors, and the department is required to investigate. I'm afraid I'll need to issue you a citation." I swallowed hard, my mind whirling. Is there anything I can do? I mean, surely you can see that this is just a personal vendetta against us. The officer sighed, an apologetic look on his face. "I'm sorry, but my hands are tied. The best I can suggest is that you appear in court and plead your case. Hopefully, the judge will see that this is a malicious complaint and dismiss it." I thanked the officer, my mind already spinning with ways to fight this latest attack. As I closed the door, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger towards Karen. This was clearly her way of getting back at us for standing up to her, and I refused to let her win. Determined, I marched over to Danny's house, ready to enlist his help. I knew that with his connections and influence, we stood a better chance of navigating this legal minefield. But when I arrived, I was met with a surprising sight. Karen was standing on Danny's doorstep, her expression a mix of desperation and fear. And to my astonishment, Danny was listening intently, his brow furrowed in concern. As I approached, Karen caught sight of me and her eyes widened in panic. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice a harsh whisper. "All of this is because of you and your family." Danny held up a hand, silencing her. "Karen, I understand you're upset, but lashing out like this isn't going to solve anything. Let's talk about this calmly and see if we can find a way to address your concerns." I couldn't believe my eyes. Danny was actually trying to reason with Karen, despite everything she had done to us. I felt a surge of admiration for his compassion, even in the face of such unrelenting hostility. As I watched the interaction unfold, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly Karen had come to Danny about. Was she finally ready to make amends, or was she simply plotting her next move in this ongoing feud? Whatever the case, I knew that I would need to be on high alert. Karen was a formidable opponent, and with Danny's involvement, the stakes had just been raised. As I watched the exchange between Danny and Karen unfold, I couldn't help but feel a mix of confusion and curiosity. What could Karen possibly be talking to Danny about, after all the trouble she had caused our family? Danny seemed to be listening intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. Whatever Karen was saying, it seemed to be something that had shaken her to her core. Gone was the smug, self-assured woman I had come to know. In her place was a figure who looked utterly rattled and vulnerable. After a few moments, Danny's expression softened, and he placed a gentle hand on Karen's shoulder. "I understand, Karen. This must be a very difficult situation for you." Karen's eyes widened, and she glanced over at me, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. You have to help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I don't know what else to do." Danny nodded, his gaze shifting to me. "Come on in, both of you. I think we need to have a serious discussion." Exchanging a puzzled look with Karen, I followed Danny into his home, my mind racing with questions. What could have possibly happened to shake Karen's resolve and drive her to seek out Danny's help? Once we were all seated in Danny's living room, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Karen fidgeted nervously, while Danny seemed to be carefully considering his words. Finally, he spoke. "Karen has come to me with a rather unusual request. It seems that she's been the victim of some kind of extortion scheme, and she's desperate for help." I felt my eyes widen in surprise. Extortion. That was certainly not what I had been expecting. "Extortion?" I echoed, glancing at Karen. "What exactly is going on?" Karen took a deep breath, her fingers trembling. "It started a few months ago. I started receiving anonymous letters demanding that I pay a certain amount of money or they would ruin my life." Danny nodded solemnly. "The letters threatened to expose some kind of secret or scandal. Is that right?" Karen nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yes, that's exactly it. They know something about me, something that I can't let anyone else find out. So I've been paying them, just like they asked, but now they're asking for more and more, and I just can't keep up." I felt a surge of sympathy for Karen, despite our tumultuous history. Extortion was a serious and terrifying crime, and the thought of someone holding that kind of power over her was chilling. "What can we do to help?" I asked, leaning forward. Danny cleared his throat. "Well, first and foremost, we need to get the authorities involved. This is a criminal matter, and Karen needs to file a report." Karen's eyes widened in panic. No, I can't do that," she exclaimed. They'll find out, and then everything will be ruined. Danny held up a hand, his expression calm and reassuring. Karen, I understand your concerns, but the only way to put a stop to this is to involve the police. We need to get them on the case, and we need to do it quickly before the extortionists can do any more damage. Karen chewed on her lip, her brow furrowed in anguish. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Okay, fine. But you have to promise that you'll keep this completely confidential. Danny nodded, his gaze unwavering. You have my word, Karen. We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise. As I watched the exchange, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. Perhaps this was the turning point we had been waiting for, the moment when Karen's walls finally came down and she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions. Whatever the case, one thing was clear. The tables had turned, and the hunter had become the hunted. Now, it was our turn to come to Karen's aid, and in doing so, perhaps we could finally put an end to this bitter feud once and for all.